Richard Cole and his family have been heavily involved in the sport of racing for a very long time. It's become even more apparent through the company IRT, which he joined some 5 or 6 years ago. Today we get a chance to sit down with him, have a chat to him about his involvement in racing, why our IRT and the brand are such an important part of the future of his involvement, and learn a little bit about his first-class rugby career as well. IRT, it's your horse and our passion. It's actually your passion, isn't it?
Love them. Absolutely love them. Have grown up around them. My grandfather was a thoroughbred trainer in Takanini, so I can remember school holidays were spent with my mum's parents either fishing or my dad's parents at the stables having to muck out boxes. Some fun times though. Yeah.
So the passion for the horse and the love of the horse was there pretty much early on.
Definitely. It would be fair to say that in the early part they frightened me a bit. So it took a little bit of encouragement to get in amongst it and handle them and do those things. Whereas my older brother, and at not an old age, would go and ride track work, and he was probably more the horse person than I was. But as we got a little older and the opportunity presented itself to be involved in racing and ownership, that wasn't something that he was keen on, and it's certainly something that I was.
What about your mum and dad? How many brothers and sisters for you?
One brother.
One brother?
One brother.
Yep.
As I say, he in the early days used to ride track work.
Yes.
And as he grew up, it sort of was something that he grew out of, I guess, was horses really. It wasn't really his thing. And probably as I grew into my teens and early 20s, I was all for it. Used to spend most Friday nights as a young fella, 10, 11, 12 at Alexandra Park with my father. My father loved to punt. Yes. And that's obviously come down through the year, through the family.
You got that gene?
I got that gene. But we would spend often Friday nights at Alexandra Park in the delightful Lady Lounge. He would take me along, and if it was a good night and he'd won, we'd end up at the smorgasbord they had downstairs, and if it was a bad night, it was the burger stand that was out the way out. Out the way out.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I say, it was around us the whole time.
Yeah, that link with Nigel Te's continued as well, because obviously yes. We'll touch on some of the horses that you raced out of he and Lee's barn. You must have followed him so closely as a jockey in that early 80s when he won a Doncaster and a Tancred and a Sydney Cup, all in the space of a month.
Oh, it was all in the space of, I think, almost 7 days. Yeah. It was a miracle week. And
I think he won 5 Group 1s.
Yeah, he did. Five Group 1s, I think, in 7 days.
Yeah.
And that set Nigel up. The money that he made out of that, because he was still an apprentice at that stage.
Yeah.
If I'm right in remembering that.
Prince Majestic was one of those horses,
I think. Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Yes, yeah, for Ray Werner.
Great trainer.
Yes, that was the Takanini era where my grandfather was. So that set him up. And that was a stepping stone for Nigel, really was. And then he spent time riding in Sydney, and then ultimately spent sort of the latter part of his career in Hong Kong, which was also very good for him, and was the opportunity for him when he came back to New Zealand to really do what he wanted to do, and that was turn his hand to training.
Can train a horse.
Trained a Derby winner in his first year, I think.
Can set a horse. He's
one of the few people that has an ability to buy a horse, but also to set a horse for a race. And generally if Nige says today's the day to have a go, very seldom has he been wrong.
Yeah, right. What about
luckily for me?
What about school for you? Were you much of a scholar?
Yes, it came reasonably easily.
Right.
Did I apply myself a lot? Probably not. I had a love for sport, and it was where a lot of time was spent. But I got my grades, and I got through reasonably comfortably. I went back to the 7th form year, really only with the one intention was to try and make the New Zealand secondary school team. That was the ultimate plan. And the idea was not to really spend as much time at high school that year because I was really just the focus. I had to be enrolled, and I'd had the conversation with the headmaster, and he was reasonably au fait with that.
So what school's this at?
Rosal College, just here in Papakura.
Yep.
Yeah, not far away. Grew up in Papakura, South Auckland boy. Ended up becoming head boy, which sort of threw the spanner in the works a bit, which meant I had to show up, and so I focused my attentions on things like introducing mufti to the school and organising the school ball and all the fun stuff and all the good stuff.
Right.
And that was a focus.
I would never have picked it.
Yes, no, I always had a little bit of enjoyment for the social side of things. And was fortunate enough to make the NZ secondary schools team. With the plan realistically was to do university, and I really wanted to be a marine biologist. That was my one passion. And I had a plan in place and came back from that tour. We toured Australia. I think we went the week after we played in the North-South zone. They chose a New Zealand under-19 team, which I made, and came back from that and was quite sick and spent a month in hospital with quite to this day, not really anyone was able to diagnose what was wrong, but came out of that, had gone in a very fit person, much fitter than I am today, but came out of that and had lost a lot of weight and wasn't particularly well and really needed some time to get myself right. And that was around about the October, so I didn't end up back at finishing school. And an opportunity presented itself to, of all things, to buy a menswear store. I had the best part-time job at school. Unfortunately for me, I didn't have to do the supermarket route. I ended up at a cool menswear store that was in Papakura, a place called Rockefellers, and that was my Friday night job. Through that contact... And
you ended up buying it?
No, not that one. Through someone that I knew that was involved in that business.
Yeah.
Knew a bloke that had another menswear store, and the guy running it had fleeced him, and he was just looking to move it on. And at that stage, my rugby career was going in the right direction, and I'd had my first... So
you played for senior rugby while you were still at high school?
No, I didn't. I had my first game for counties, though, while I was still at high school.
Oh, there you go.
I hadn't actually played a senior...
Oh, you haven't played a senior game?
I hadn't played a senior club game, no.
Well, you must have gone all right, because you can't go from that to that.
Yeah, well...
So you were a fullback?
I did. I played fullback at the time, yes. Played against North Harbour in the inaugural game when North Harbour became a union in '85. Right. Under lights at Western Springs, and it's quite a clear memory because I got picked up for the game from school, and obviously had been given a kit bag at training and I think possibly a tie, but certainly that was about it. So I wasn't ready at school because I was a touch embarrassed of what was going on and thought the kids would think this was a little bit odd. So hopped on the bus in my school uniform, and Alan Dawson was captain of counties at the time, and I jumped on the old style bus with a little dicky seat in the front, and I sort of got on and the eyes were looking at me, and it was basically, that's your seat, son, sit down, shut up, don't say a word. So got through that game, and that was really, I guess, a stepping stone. So there was a motivation for me to stick around. I was keen to pursue the career and the opportunity in rugby. So rolling back, ended up buying this menswear store.
Yes.
And through the contacts in rugby and the guys that I knew, whether it was at Harbour or at Auckland or in counties, I'd get a lot of them coming and we wanted to be kitted out in all the latest gear. And
so it went okay?
Yeah, no, it did actually, yeah. And I started it, and I didn't have any money, but my father went guarantor for a loan. He didn't have the money either, but he backed me and said, well, I'll back you to have a go, and if it doesn't work out, well, your mother and I'll be, we'll be on bread and water. And it went all right, it went good. And 2 years later, I sold that and then transitioned into starting another business, producing uniforms, primarily for sports teams. That's where it started. And then that, as years went on, morphed into other aspects, and then we got it heavily ensconced in licensing, and that was quite a substantial business that grew to.
Right. So what licensing, when you say that?
So we held licensed rights to manufacture product to sell into retail. So we held rights for Warner Brothers and Disney and things like Marvel, and so you'd go and buy a Batman T-shirt or a Frozen dress, and it all
came through you.
Yeah, and we had the All Blacks rights to manufacture a lot of the merchandise. We had all sorts of licenses. We used to produce the Buzzy Bee toys, the wooden toys, and it was a pretty exciting time. So
where was the rugby career at this stage then?
Rugby career was moving along.
Right.
I suffered a lot with injuries and had, so as I say, 86 was my first full season with counties.
We've got a cracking photo here of you and a reasonable fullback from a national side that went okay.
Yeah, Serge Blanco, yeah. We were fortunate enough to play them at County Stadium in '89.
How good.
We went down 23-21. There was an opportunity to win it, and things fell a little short, let's say. Yeah, that was a fantastic moment. It really was, because he had been my idol growing up. I think he was certainly my idol when I was growing up playing football, and so to play against him was a massive thrill. work came along, and
so when you say work, what was that? Was that just a continuation?
This was the business I'd started after I'd sold the store,
Yep.
and I'd started it with nothing. It was me, you know, in the apparel trade, and I only
So it's a tricky trade.
nothing about it at all, to be honest.
No.
And would spend many a late night trying to teach myself how to grade a pattern and roll fabric and cut and do all the rest of it. So certainly wasn't one of the things I did attempt, but you know, would find some sewers, and then I didn't have any problem getting orders. I'd go out and get, sales were easy. Deliverables not so much.
The easy part.
Hey, look, it was a fun time. And a lot of guys that had played football with were very good mates, and you know, they had commitments, and I had work, but you know, we would catch up on Friday nights and Saturday nights, and so I still sort of, you know, kept in touch. But it was probably a really interesting period of my life in terms of learning a lot, because in 1990 when I didn't play, and the year prior I'd had quite a lot of press, and there had been an article on the front page of the Herald and a photograph, and you know, you start to sort of believe a little bit yourself.
Yep.
And used to do a radio show every Saturday morning, and you know, with Macca every Saturday I'd be on there doing the radio show. And in 1990, not playing, I remember showing up to a game, and all the guys that were there, all the scribes, all the journos were there, and these are guys that had sort of wanted you all the time, and
they just brushed you.
Didn't want to know me.
Yeah.
And that was probably a really critical moment in my life where I realised that, you know, you were only valuable for what you could offer at the time. And that was a really big turning point, and probably a lesson that I passed through to 3 or 4 guys that were in rising careers at the time, who were probably finding much the same thing. And still today, those guys will sort of say to me, it was, you know, it was a valuable lesson that you'd sort of passed on, that they sort of took heed of as well. Let's
get on to some of the horses that you've been involved in, because you talked about ownership in the early stages of our conversation, and you've had some pretty smart gallopers, and most of them with Nigel Te Aroha.
Yeah, that's true. We've always been traders, and that was always the plan. Try and buy the right type. We never overspent. You know, we were never going to buy necessarily the most well-bred horses. We generally always bought on type.
And trusted his eye.
Absolutely. I will claim to having been influential in 2 or 3 of those purchases. And that was always the plan, was to try and get horses up and going, and if they were good enough, and to trade, and when we have been very successful in doing so. So a lot of the better horses that, you know, had been group race winners, we sort of had traded at that point when they were at their, I guess, their most saleable option. So they'd never really got to see
the absolute best of them.
Yeah, and what that might have sort of played out to be. But, you know, there's a lesson that I once learned, and probably one of the very first ones, that we bought a horse that we raced called Jack the Stripper, who we paid $6,000 for.
Were you involved in the naming of this?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I was actually. So we paid $6,000.
Won the Wellington Guineas or something
like that? He won the Auckland Guineas first.
Yes.
He ran second at Ruakaka in that 2-year-old stakes race they used to have up there.
The early one, yes.
As a 2-year-old. Then came back as a 3-year-old, ran second at Hawke's Bay to Dan Road in his first start back. Then ran second in the Hawke's Bay Guineas to Dan Road. Actually, might have been second to Bunker, I think, Trevor McKee and Stephen McKee's good 3-year-old. He then won the Auckland Guineas. He then went to Wellington and won the Wellington Guineas. And then big money offer came in, and it was, I think I was only in, geez, I can't remember how old I was. I was probably in my late 20s, I suppose. And it was
bye-bye.
Serious money.
Yep.
However, we were smarter than that. And
so it wasn't bye-bye, you thought, no.
We thought we could win the Derby, and that was a vote that David, my uncle, obviously.
That was St Reems's Derby, I think. Was that the Justice League was in St Reems's?
Oh, gee, now you're stretching the memory a little bit there.
I think I looked that up.
Might have been earlier than that.
Okay.
But anyway, we thought we could win the Derby, and so decided that we wouldn't take the money. But as a very valuable lesson in this story is that I can remember being in Manukau City having a coffee with David, mulling over the fact that, do we take this money or don't we? And Roy Purdon, Mr. Purdon, walked in and said, you boys look like you've got the weight on your shoulders. So we explained the story to him, and I remember the words clear as a bell today, saying, boys, I'll give you one piece of advice, that checkbooks don't break legs. And we probably, not that the horse got hurt, fortunately, we did have a crack at the Derby, and I think he ran second last.
Yes.
He came back after a spell and won an open handicap trial by Streets, and the bloke from Hong Kong that had always been on him came back and said he still wanted him, and The money was a little less, but still was great. So we weren't going to make the same mistake twice. So I've never made that mistake again when serious money's been around, and you know, I've always let the head rule the heart.
Play that song. Very talented.
Yeah, she was.
Won the Eclipse.
Yes, yeah, won her first 3. Went into the Karaka Million, I think, as that stage probably the shortest priced favourite in history. I think Boys Get Paid had everything riding on it, and possibly rightfully so. She came up short, ran second. J Mac rode her, and he couldn't have ridden her any better. He just, you know, she struck one better on the day on Te Aroha's horse, and you know, she was beaten on her merits, but she was a lovely filly. Turn
the Ace. Now I want to talk to you about him because he hasn't won the biggest races, but he's won a hell of a lot of them.
He has, yeah.
And he won, as we're doing this, the other day, so that was his 9th win from just, what, 25 starts?
25 starts. I haven't actually been on track to see any of them.
So how does that work?
So probably that's a good thing. Andrew Forsman would probably tell me to make sure I never
don't come
and let that continue to happen. But he's just been a fantastic horse.
Right.
Really has. Won his first 2 as a 2-year-old, one being a stakes race in the latter part of that 2-year-old season, both at Te Aroha. Andrew backed him up a week after his first win, which I thought this was ambitious, and he got the job done, and probably didn't come back quite as good in his early 3-year-old season. And I guess looking back, hindsight was not that I'd ever tell Andrew, because he goes okay. Phenomenal job. But probably, you know, he might not have had the time off he needed, but, you know, he came back from that spell and then started to put a few together, had a few little niggles, and we gave him the time, and he's now, you know, reaped the rewards for us, you know, winning 9 from 25. He's a handy horse. Yeah. Really handy horse.
Richard Unhitched, Kissinger, you've had a few good gallopers, but Richard, when we're talking about the horses, the IRT situation and how you became involved in that in, what, 2016, how did that come about?
Yeah, so as I've mentioned earlier, David, my uncle, had been one of the founders of IRT in New Zealand back in '83, I believe, with Quentin Wallace, who originally started IRT in Australia back in about '72. So it had got to the point, I think, where they were looking at the possibility of, you know, an exit strategy, and I had rolled out of selling my own business, which, you know, the plan wasn't at that stage to do a hell of a lot. The opportunity presented itself. I'd had this passion for the industry. You know, I'd been in it a long time as far as ownership is concerned, and, you know, knew a lot of people, particularly through the thoroughbred space, probably not so much in the harness side, and came to me and said, would it be something I'd be interested in getting involved with and buying into the business, and I jumped at it. I was really excited to be part of it, and so I put my foot on the door in 1st of June 2016, and so 8 years nearly. It's gone pretty quick. It's gone pretty quick, and there's been a lot change, you know, in the industry in that time, a hell of a lot.
What you've done, and I'll talk about sponsorship and why you're so heavily involved in that shortly, and the branding side of things, but you've made IRT the one-stop shop for any horse coming in or out of the country. Is that fair to say? Is that?
Oh, absolutely. And I wouldn't say that was my vision by any stretch. Certainly a lot of that credit goes to, you know, the other partners in IRT on a global basis, and
because it is a global company.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we're in 5 countries, and there's plans to expand into further. But certainly our vision has been that we want to be vertically integrated, and it's not just about flying horses. It's about, you know, first point of arrival situations. It's about quarantine facilities. Ideally for us, it's important that, you know, if a client is moving a horse from one country to another, they have the confidence that that horse is staying in IRT hands from start to finish. And that's been a really big part of our drive.
So forward. That's evolved, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, look, those things take, you know, a lot of time and energy, and obviously a lot of money. And you can only grow at the level that you can afford that time and you can afford that money.
It must be a challenge, and I know through Addington Raceway, trying to get horses for IRT New Zealand Cups and carnivals and that sort of thing. And certainly through the COVID period. So you picked a pretty good time to get involved, didn't you? Because
we did.
It was probably the greatest challenge then, one that I'm sure you and Sheena probably had many late nights thinking, what are we actually doing here?
Most of my friends think that my hair's dyed. Because I probably
well, it should be.
I should be really, really grey, or there shouldn't be a lot of it. Look, it certainly has had its challenges. However, I have to say that's probably where I thrive, is when things are at their hardest. I really rise to those challenges, and it motivates me probably more than ever.
Right.
As opposed to when things are a little bit more cruisy and, you know, you take your foot off the gas a little bit. So, you know, Sheena would probably be watching this and sit at home and say, that's probably not the case when you walk in the door some nights. And she would be dead right, because she's my biggest supporter, and she's been phenomenal.
You've been together how long?
Married 28 years.
28 years.
Coming up 29, actually.
She's an amazing woman.
A fantastic woman. I was certainly got lucky there.
Yeah.
Yeah, met her through work, and we worked together on the previous business for 16 years.
Right.
And still together, and together 31 years. So, yeah. So,
yeah.
no,
You're doing okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was probably one of my better finds.
The brand and how you've used it via sponsorship, in particular around the IRT New Zealand Trotting Cup.
Yes.
That is you showing your support of the industry, but obviously you see a great vehicle there in getting the brand out there, don't you?
I touched on earlier, I came out of a branding business, you know, and one of the things that I learned in my career is that without a brand, you don't have a lot. Now, whether that's your own brand, you know, whether that's a company that you're involved with, whether that's a company that you start or a brand that you drive. And so brand recognition, I think, is critical, because a lot of that is built around reputation. And it was very important to me when I arrived at IRT that, you know, they had a very strong hold in the harness market. But I felt that there wasn't probably enough going back in. And for me, it was really important for us to show, I guess, our thanks and our gratitude in a different way. And that was to become more visible in what we were doing and how.
Well, you've done that.
Yeah, and look, it has been fantastic. As I mentioned, you know, it wasn't something, the harness industry prior to me joining IRT wasn't something that I had a lot of opportunity to spend time in, especially with a lot of the people. In saying that, it's probably been one of the most enjoyable times of my life, and I've met some phenomenal people. We've formed some fantastic friendships, have had a great ride through it, racing some fantastic horses with fabulous people, and, you know, to be able to do that for a job as well, yeah, I'm a pretty lucky man.
All right, you started sponsoring the Cup in 2019?
Look, it must have been 2020,
2020, yep.
Because it was, I think, leading into COVID.
COVID, yep.
And their prior sponsor decided it wasn't
they were
going
out.
to
Yep,
be.
2020, I think you're right.
We're into our second stint of
yep.
our 3-year contract.
Yeah.
And this will be year 2 of the second.
What it has meant, and you mentioned racing some horses with some great people, is that you've got involved in standard breed ownership, and
Yes.
in quite a big way, because you're playing with some serious players, the Ken Breckens of this world. You obviously got horses with Barry Purdon and Scott Phelan, and more than one horse. So you've gone into it, you know, at the top end, so to speak.
Just love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely do. Sheena keeps asking for a list of how many there are. And
well, I did threaten you for this interview that we might go through them, but no, that won't be happening.
People often say, you know, how many are there, and I sort of usually use the adage.
You do exactly what you did. Shrug your shoulders.
You don't ask a woman her age, so, you know.
Don't be asking me that.
Yeah.
Supreme Dominator, Major Perry, Sooner the Better, who remarkably has only won 4 races, but
I know.
he's
Crazy,
won
isn't it?
$400,000. He's run second in the Miracle Mile.
Second in the Chariots, second in the Miracle Mile. And look, he's got the heart of a lion. He's not very big, but he just does not know how not to try. His stablemate Merlin has
got his measure.
Has beaten him I don't know how many times. I don't even think at trials, even though there's been so many close finishes, he's actually got his nose in front of Merlin. I think he's been beaten twice in harness and group races by Merlin by a nose. Merlin's a superstar horse. He, to be honest, he's probably one of my favourite horses. I've said that for a while. I don't own a leg at him, but he's a beautiful animal, and he's just a magnificent beast. So, you know, it's been a great ride, and have been involved with some fabulous trainers and people along the way. And
yeah, I mentioned the Breckens, obviously the Kennards.
Yes. Peter Bacon.
Yep. You know, and they're great friends, aren't they?
Fantastic friends.
Yeah.
And Peter is a guy that, you know, probably doesn't get the recognition he deserves.
Well, I do know how many horses he's got.
I know.
It's over 30.
Yes, I know. And he wouldn't want me to say, but
no.
You know, he's a guy that just puts a huge amount in, and he's very loyal, and he supports a lot of people, and he's been a bloke that, coming into this, I never knew. He and his partner Judy, and we spent a lot of time with them socially.
You could have done well out of him. back in the men's
That's
wear
right.
days.
Yes, I could have. Yeah.
If you had a shoe store, you'd do pretty well too.
My best customer, that's for sure.
He would have been.
He certainly knows how to put the style on, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's been a great.
I mentioned
ride.
Riberas. He's been able to win. Obviously a kindergarten stakes, so he looks a horse of the future. Franco Mack, unfortunately, isn't a horse of the future because ill-fated, but he ran into that bloody Akuta a couple of times, and those types of horses, you know, there's always, you haven't quite had that superstar yet.
No, not yet.
And each year...
And you know what? It might never happen. And you know, I'm okay with that because there's a lot of people that go through this industry their whole life and, you know, probably would wish for one of those horses that name you on that list you've called out. So I
actually split Akuta and Republican Party in one of those races. I think it was the Flying Stakes or something. So
I'm very grateful for the success we've had.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of very promising horses on the way through. And Scotty Phelan phoned the other day to say that you know, Sooner the Better was back in work and Confederate was back in work, who's only had 2 starts.
All right, they're paces, which is great.
Yes, trotters.
What are you getting involved in trotters
how
for?
Good, right? So far, I think of shares and trotters I've had is 2. One being Bet and Win, who's possibly the most promising trotter in the country at the moment, on the rise. And a 2-year-old called Higher Power, who obviously has won 2 of his 3 and won the IRT Young Guns trotting final recently. So I thought to myself at the time when it was mentioned that, how about getting involved with some trotters? And I think Bernie Hackett was the first one that probably convinced me to get involved, that, you know, this would be a good thing. And I thought, what am I doing here? Generally, I watch races and most of them don't go away. But, you know, look, it's just, again, I come back to, it's not even so much about the racing, it's just about the people. And it's been a fantastic ride for us. We've been incredibly welcomed into an industry that's, you know, that has just been a dream for us. It really has been a dream ride.
Your investment in IRT and the huge global brand that it is now, and I know you employ a huge number of staff, and obviously your support of the harness code as well. You're not going anywhere, are they? You and Sheena, you're in this for the long haul.
Yeah, we definitely are. Yeah, absolutely. And well, as long as she lets me out every now and then. I was put on a strict rein this year not to buy.
How did that go?
I can neither confirm nor deny. I don't know.
We might see the Cole name in a couple going forward.
I did end up breeding a couple of thoroughbreds, so we'll see what happens there. So I've got high hopes there, only from the point of view as the mare that I bred to was the last horse my father and I raced together, and so, you know, her first foal actually foaled down the day he passed away. So he was unfortunately not here to learn that we had a beautiful colt by a stern, a yearling colt. So we'll hopefully see that he comes out and graces the racetrack, and let's hope that miracles can happen and he becomes a champion.
Well, there's always a story behind a horse. So.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Well, it's been magnificent to have you part of the Standardbred Code, and looking forward to that continuing.
Yeah, Greg, absolutely. It's, you know, we've got an exciting time ahead this year with the Cup coming up and some fantastic horses around, and you know, it's
you must be enjoying the Entain involvement as well.
Definitely. You know, they've breathed a lease of life, haven't they, into our industry across the codes. I think I'm a realist in the sense that they're a business and they're here to turn a profit. They're not a charity. And you know, whilst that some people might see them as being the saviour, I think it's definitely up to us as an industry to ensure that what money has been put into the codes we use properly. And if we don't and we squander it, well, you know, we've only got ourselves to blame if we can't make something of this opportunity in front of us. So, you know, I think there's a lot of work to do. If I was being brutally honest, I think the Thoroughbred Code are probably a little bit ahead of, probably well ahead of where we need to be in the harness code at the moment. We've now got a new CEO who I have had the pleasure of meeting well before he came on into this role, Brad, last year. Seems like a fabulous man, and I hope he brings a new vision and we, you know, drive an opportunity forward, because it's here for us. And now we just have to take it, and that's got to be a really exciting time for everybody in this industry.